Yeah, odds and evens here for your club histories. Today we're down in East Brighton to talk to Andy Schofield, the Vice Chairman of the club, about the history of this great club. Look at the setting, in the natural setting here of the South Downs, as I say, in East Brighton, East Sussex. A lot of people ask me, where's Whitehall? Well, it's in Brighton, people, and it's just to the east of Brighton and just up from the marina. So if you're around, come down and have a look. We're going to speak to Andy, have a look at where the club started, how it started, and kind of build up to where it is today. Beautiful. So Andy, the history of the club, where did it start?
Started 1945, just after the Second World War. Whitehawk and Manor Farm Old Boys was the name of the club originally, and that was named after the boys' clubs in the local area. The two local housing estates that served this part of East Brighton, Whitehawk and Manor Farm. Those lads were too old to play in the boys' teams. They were over 18 and they wanted to form a men's team, so they formed Whitehawk and Manor Farm Old Boys. They joined the Brighton Hove District League 1945, playing on open park pitches at the junior level.
And they did all right in the first years. They did really well.
They did a double in the first year. Second year they got moved into Brighton Hove District League 2. They didn't have a good season, and the following year they were dropped down to League 4, and that's where the rise started really. From that season, 46-47, did the double, promoted again, and when they got to 50-51, they won the Sussex County Cup. That's the first major senior trophy and the only club ever to win the Sussex County Cup from the Brighton Hove District League.
So the Brighton Hove District League was really low level. They achieved against the more established teams in Sussex to win that cup, which is phenomenal, isn't it?
They won cups at junior, intermediate and senior level in 3 years on the run in non-league football. Unprecedented, and we don't think anybody else has ever done that. More or less with the same players as well. And nearly all of them were from the Whitehawk and Manor Farm estates.
So from the community they built this
They
club.
were getting gates of over 1,000. They were taking coach loads of people to away cup ties. 1950-51 season had lots of publicity. The Evening Argus and the Brighton and Hove Herald were giving them loads of publicity, and they were very, very popular. They were seen as being a family club from East Brighton, gone from nothing, 1945 Parks team, to winning the County Cup in 1951, an incredible rise.
So that's in 6 seasons?
Yes, it is.
6 or 7 seasons?
It is.
That's phenomenal.
Yes. There were people on the first pitch we got in 1945. There were a couple of players, several players on that photograph who played in the County Cup final in 51. And subsequently, over the next few years, it was still youth players coming through or people from the local estate during the 50s.
1960, there was a name change to Whitehawk FC?
Yes.
But they'd moved to here by then?
Yes, they had. Now, so this ground's famous for the setting, as you can see, on a beautiful setting in the South Downs National Park, and also being called the enclosed ground. And you couldn't get a less enclosed ground than this. But the name originates because when they played on the old park pitches, when they were getting a big crowd, they couldn't charge people to come in, so they got to get permission from the Sussex FA to enclose the ground with a tarpaulin, which is what they used to do for big games. So it became East Brighton Park, in brackets, the enclosed ground. So the ground would only be enclosed for certain matches. And then in the mid-50s, once they became an established county league club, the council, who own all of East Brighton Park, gave them this particular pitch, which is a little bit of a way up the road in from the beginning of East Brighton Park. So they moved here and played here from 1954-55 season. And this just simply became known as the enclosed ground. And it wasn't enclosed by tarpaulins, it was enclosed by like hedges that they built around it. But some of the very early pictures show it's still very exposed. It wasn't really enclosed, but at least they could charge people to come in through the gate. And people still have always stood on the hill and watched the game, just as they did at the old pitch, where they stood on the banks and watched the game without paying. So they established themselves here in the County League. They were never outside the top 5 during the 50s up until 1960, and then they changed the name to Whitehawk FC from 1960 onwards. Originally there was nothing here, absolutely nothing here at all. The players used to change in the Sheepcote Valley campsite changing rooms. They used to pay the council a rent for that. Opposing teams used to hate playing here because the weather is pretty bad in the winter. It's nice on a day like this, but in the winter it's terrible. And there were no facilities for spectators at all. It's unbelievable, really. In the 60s, on the back of another of a famous Hawks treble-winning season, 61-62, when they won the County Cup and the County League, the council gave them a grant to self-build the stand that you can see just over there. And so over about 2 or 3 years, the members of the club and the players and the officials built that stand. And eventually, that was a stand that had standing for a few hundred people in it when it was originally built. And that was the first time we ever had any shelter up here. And it included dugouts and dressing rooms. So for the first time ever, there were facilities up here. So it wasn't until the 60s that players could actually get changed on the site.
There's Marcelo. That's you.
Yes, that is me, yeah.
That is you.
Oh, I didn't realise there's me now.
Oh, look.
That would come and do also. No, you can't. Oh, look at that picture. What's that picture of Brandon O'Neill? My picture of Brandon O'Neill doing here. That's a new one. The name which is always associated with the whole of this club is Powell, is the Powell family, who the club owes its entire existence to. Ron Powell, who was the founder, along with a number of other people, legend has it, the meeting at the old Whitehawk Secondary School to form the club. Subsequently, his son Ken, who was a legendary player for the Hawks, played from the 50s until the early 70s. Ken's brother Dave, and also Ken's wife, Marilyn, who also worked behind the scenes at the club. That family really sustained the club over a long period of time. Many legendary tales. Ron Powell's wife used to wash all the kit. They lived at Lintott Avenue in the middle of the estate, so their back garden, and all the kit was blown in the wind, everybody could see it. They played in their famous kit from the early days would you describe it as an Arsenal kit? Red shirts, white sleeves. But you look at the Hawks players in those days and they look immaculate. And in fact, when they won the RAU Cup in 1959, they played in silk shirts. Unbelievable. I don't know where they got the money from to buy a set of silk shirts from, but that was the publicity about not only did they win the Cup, but they all played in silk shirts way ahead of their time. People were still playing in those old-fashioned rugby shirts and nobody had designed brilliant kit. You would never imagine Whitehawk would have played like that, but the Whitehawk looked the part in those shirts. The other thing about the club was they never paid anybody. It was a really important principle for Ron Powell and Ken Powell, and actually, by the time other clubs, everybody started paying in the late 70s and early 80s. Sooner or later we had to pay players, but we held up the amateur ethic all the way through that successful period of the 50s and the 60s. Now, players weren't allowed to be paid, but they were paid what was called boot money, where the players put in invoices for work done at the ground and things like this, and they hadn't really done the work, it was just a way of paying them. And there were big controversies at other clubs, and we complained to the league about it because we lost Billy Ford to New Haven, and they were paying him, and they found that there was no case to answer, he wasn't being paid. But we still felt that other players were inducing our team away. No better illustrated by the 1964 County League team that won the County League against Lewes, the County League winners. Lewes was second, we pipped them to the post at the last minute, and then when our manager Ken Carter went to Lewes, half the team left and went to Lewes. So even in those days, non-league football, the ethic of the club was it was always going to be local people from the local area, and even in those, by the time it got into the 60s, reality hit home really. You could be induced away, probably better facilities. By that stage, teams like Lewes were not playing County League football. And teams like Eastbourne Town, Eastbourne United and Lewes were playing Isthmian League or Corinthian League or whatever it was called in those days, and they were playing at a higher level. And so players wanted to better themselves. So the club were relegated for the first time in 67-68. They went down from County 1 to County 2. They relegated again 77-78. And haven't been relegated again until quite recently, when we've had 2 relegations in 2 years. So there was very little way of generating income at the club. Ron Powell had a lottery system called the Eustace tickets, which raised hundreds and hundreds of pounds, which involved agents going out all over the place, across the city, across Hove, selling these tickets midweek. Incredible amount of fundraising behind the scenes just to pay the expenses, but without paying the players anything. So it's just to keep the club, buy the kit, buy the balls, pay for pay for whatever they needed to do to keep the club head above water. I mean, there were no lights here, no floodlights here, and there wasn't until they got the old stand, the baths, heating the water, the electric and all that sort of thing. When they moved the ground up here, the gates did drop, because you think about where the old ground is, you could see it. You could see it from the road, and lots of people knew where the club was. There are people who live now around here now still don't know where this ground is, because it takes a bit of a way to find it, even though there's a sign down the bottom of the road that says Whitehawk Football Club, but people don't notice it. So the gates dropped immediately from about 1,000 to 500 on average when they came here. And by the 60s, once that successful team had broken up, the gates had crumbled away to a couple of hundred. And even in 83, when they won the County League again, they were still struggling to get that many people up here.
Sammy Donnelly came in 1980, and that started that springboard.
Yes.
That was a springboard
Yes,
for
it was.
quite a lot of success.
It was.
And the family involved then was predominantly the Guns.
Powell's was still involved, Sweetman's, Guns, and Watts families. And that's a characteristic of the club. I think over the years is that the number of people from the same families that have been involved, absolutely legendary figures who've toiled away behind the scenes, sometimes playing, sometimes they had relatives or sons that played. Lots and lots of families that worked behind the scenes at the club. So it was always a club which was run on a shoestring by family members and real Hawks heroes, I think, from behind the scenes.
So Donnelly comes in, the 80s, it lifts up.
It
and
does.
It coincdes with loads of money, the city.
Sammy Donnelly, I think, possibly the first manager who was allowed to pay the players. They're definitely attracting talent. There was definitely money coming in from somewhere, we're not entirely sure where, to make sure that Sammy Donnelly could put a squad together, which he did do, and he won the County League. And I mean, Sammy Donnelly, what a legendary figure. He was manager of the club twice. A lot of anybody who's played here in the 80s, the Sammy Donnelly era is another one of the golden eras. So 70s was probably a decade to forget after the 60s. 80s, a decent side. 1988 got to the fourth qualifying round of the FA Cup. Drew at Bognor 2-2, equalised in the last minute. Jerry Fell, another ex-Brighton of Albion player, who's a legend at the club. Sammy Donnelly claims he was hit round the head by a Bognor fan with an umbrella for bringing him on. He brought him on specifically to take a free kick in the last minute. Get them back here for the replay and lost 2-0. So never got to the FA Cup first round. But that was that attendance of around about nearly 2,000 was the record attendance for the ground until it was only beaten in 2015 when we played Dagenham and Redbridge here and got a gate of 2,174.
What happened in the 90s?
The 90s we were still winning the odd trophy, the odd cup trophy. And it seems there was more a nucleus of younger players. I think of younger and local players, and I think maybe some of that is to do with the fact that there wasn't the investment. We stayed in the first division of the County League. We never looked like getting relegated, and we carried on. And they were able to generate a degree of commercial interest in the club. And in the start of this century, Ian Chapman became the manager. I think when Ian Chapman came in, there was definitely a focus on we need to win this league and get up to a next level, because then there was automatic promotion from the County 1 into a higher standard. Chapper's never got us promoted, but he had contacts with the Albion. He was a well-known figure himself in local football. You know, he was at the time. For years he was Albion's youngest ever Football League player, and he started his career here. I mean, Ian Chapman was a youth player here, and he was responsible for bringing in a higher standard of player. And one of those players who turned up was another old player of ours, Darren Freeman. Darren Freeman goes down in history as the most successful manager the club's ever had. Joint manager when George Paris and he won the County League. He won the South East League. There was a lot of investment going into the club then in that new era with first of all with George and Darren, and then with Darren Freeman. So that's when we had financial backing from KSD and John Summers, when Ned and John, Ted and Chris started getting involved with the club, and all of a sudden there was a totally different vision really for what the club could achieve. You know, you think of it as a bit of a sleeping giant with investment. The plan was to get as close to the Football League as they could, or not get into the Football League, which obviously people laughed at. You know, Whitehawk are sitting, they don't have that many fans, they haven't got much of a ground, they're playing in the County League, but I mean they got out of the County League pretty quickly. Darren Freeman took us all the way he got us into what's now the Bostik Premier, or the Isthmian Premier League. and we won that. We only spent 1 year in that league. We won it and got promoted to the National League South. And in that league, we struggled in that league, and Darren got sacked about halfway through the season and replaced by Steve King. And Steve King managed to keep the team up at the end of the season, last day of the season, a legendary game against Sutton United here on this ground where we equalised right at the end. And then another Matt Dover scored against Hayes and Yedding, and Hayes and Yedding got relegated instead of us, so we stayed in the National League South. Absolutely glorious years under Steve King. The following season we had our highest ever league finish, where we finished fourth in the National League South and qualified for the playoffs and got through to the playoff final against Boreham Wood. And if you remember that game, it was 1-1, and we had a header from a corner just before the end of the match and just over the bar, and if that had gone in we'd have been promoted to the National League. It didn't go in, went to extra time, we lost in extra time. And the following season we got to the playoffs again, lost to Ebbsfleet this time in the semi-final. But by then Steve King wasn't the manager. Steve King had left. Pablo Asensio was the manager. And since Steve King left that first time, there's been a succession of managers as we've and actually we've tumbled. We have tumbled down the league. We've had 2 relegations in 2 seasons now. So having not been relegated, only ever been relegated twice over a large number of years. We suffered our 3rd relegation in 2017-18, and then again in 18-19, so back in the Bostik South East. But gates went up last season. The fans' average gate last season was back to what it was in the golden era of the Steve King. During that period, I've glossed over really another amazing thing that's happened to the clubs widely known about is the quality of the fans and the ultras. Throughout that successful period, we've had this fan base which has generated a lot of interest in the club, and this strong anti-homophobic, anti-sexist, anti-racist stance that the fans have got, which does attract an awful lot of people into the club and attracts a degree of solidarity, or a significant amount of solidarity.
We're here at East Brighton Park, pitch number 2, where White Hawk FC originally played. This was the original enclosed ground. It's kind of spiritual being here now, standing here today on this turf, knowing that in 1945 the White Hawk players were running around on this pitch, and over the preceding years where they've got to today, and that's what it's all about, the history of the club. So this is where it all started. You can just feel it. What a backdrop, what a history. Andy, it's still quite a deprived area, really, isn't it?
Well, it is.
It's rich in lots of things.
It's still an area that, when you look at the statistics, yes, there are educational underachievement. It's not a high income area. It certainly hasn't got many of the issues that people traditionally associated with the name. There's very little going on the estate compared to what people would have imagined if you don't live here, and it's a beautiful environment. But it's true to say that opposing teams, even back in the day when the club was successful, hated coming here. They hated it because they were not only were they playing against the White Hawk team, they were playing against the community who always used to turn out. And they would certainly have told people in no uncertain terms what they thought of them. Yeah. And legend has it, Sammy Donnelly told me this as well, about aunts and older ladies and grandmas and people who would quite happily run on the pitch and accost somebody if they thought they'd kick their son or something.
Oh, really?
And they'd give quite a bit of jip out to the opposition. So there's always been that slight edge.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because now the club's known for the ultras and the support that the ultras have got, and I think it's one of the things that the club needs to do. I think to be more successful is to rediscover its links and its roots with the community. What a lot of people don't know is that 15 years ago or so we had a women's team that got to the semi-final of the FA Cup. Quite incredible.
Wow.
Lost to Arsenal, I think, in the semi-final. Knocked Liverpool out.
Wow.
I mean, and we had a lot of. We've always had, under 10s, under 11s, under 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s. We don't have those teams anymore. And I know society, things aren't the same as they used to be, and kids don't necessarily get out as often to play football. But we're missing that. I think we're missing that in terms of the way it would bring parents and younger people into the club and make a connection with the people in the local community. So that's why I'm so excited about the Crew Club Hawks initiative. I think that can do nothing but good.